Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Specifying Practice Group webinar. Our topic for today is what's so important about submittals. Our thought leaders are Dave Stutzman and Louis Metcalf. Dave is a registered architect, certified construction specifier, and founding principal of Conspectus, a specifications and quality assurance consulting firm. Louis is an architect and certified construction specifier. He's a senior quality manager for Gresham Smith and Partners, a national architecture, engineering, interiors, and planning firm. And now, Dave Lewis, over to you.
Well, welcome everyone. This is Dave Stutzman coming to you from South Jersey, and we have Louis on the line with us today, coming from Nashville. Okay, so our topic today is submittals. What's so important? Gosh, it's one of those never-ending sorts of questions that probably could go on being debated from here until eternity, and we'll probably still not end up with an answer. But we hope that everyone online with us today will help join in the discussion and add your opinions as we go along. So remember to use the chat box, and hopefully we have a couple of folks that will be joining us near the end of the presentation to jump on and in with real-time audio and contribute their own thoughts.
One of the things about submittals that's so frustrating is that none of us had a meaningful course in how to do them in college. And in fact, there's not very much written about how to process them. One of my friends and I have actually kicked around the idea of writing a book on the subject because there just really isn't a lot out there. And so what most people know is little bits and pieces that they pick up. You know, it's more legend and old wives' tales than it is a rational approach. And so we're hoping that some of the discussions, some of the ideas that we pass on today and get you guys to share, you guys and gals to share, will help each of us do a little bit better. We want to extend special thanks to Liz O'Sullivan, Kim Kirkpatrick, and Kevin O'Byrne, who sent us some things by email that we're going to be talking about, and we'll try to get Liz and Kim on at the end of the program to actually talk a little bit about some of the concerns that they have. And we really appreciate that feedback that helps us plan these sessions. Later in the session, I'm going to give you a demonstration of project information software showing how submittals can be processed electronically without even printing any paper. We're finally beginning to cross the threshold of the paperless approach to certain activities. So, back to you, David.
Okay, well, the image on the screen right now is the list of the 4 different kinds of submittals that we see identified by section format. Action submittals, informational submittals, and my favorite term for those is the inaction submittals, mainly because that's really what the informational implies. The closeout submittals, all of those documents submitted right at the very end of the process, and then maintenance material submittals. So with that, those 4 groups in mind, we want to take a look at just the kinds of things that section format says should be included in each one of the groups. Now we'll look at action and informational first, and these are grouped together mainly because section format does not define which of these belong to which group. So
the AIA 201 General Conditions has a statement in there that says that the architect may designate which submittals are in which category. So we might say the official AIA position is that that is a question of professional judgment, and opinion does vary about what things go in which category.
Right, and the other point to this is that a master spec is the one that really seemed to have introduced the action and informational submittal classifications. When they first did that, the description was contained entirely in Division 1, and most recently they've been moving those definitions by grouping the submittals under article headings in each technical section. So when they had it in Division 1, you didn't have a lot of flexibility in the technical section because the grouping was defined once in Division 1. The way it is now in Master Spec, you have complete flexibility by being able to move the submittals between the two articles to identify which is considered action and which is considered informational.
And we might say that, historically, having separate articles for each type of submittal was an option in section format, and I, for one, have been doing it for 15 or 20 years. Let's have our first polling question and see how other people are doing that, and how our audience is doing that. Do you specify action submittals and informational submittals separately? And we're getting the numbers in, and we're running neck and neck with a slight advantage on the yes. Okay, so we have 57% saying yes and 43% saying no. So it's fairly evenly divided with a slight preponderance. My firms have liked the idea of it makes it easier not only for the contractor to respond correctly, because otherwise the contractor has to try to second guess what's an informational submittal and may be expecting some things back with an action stamp on them that don't come back processed in that manner. So it gives them a little easier way to understand what's going on. And then it's also easier for the CA department in most firms to be able to figure out exactly how to handle those submittals. On the other hand, there are folks who don't think that's so necessary. Why don't you give those arguments, David?
That don't think it's necessary, because that's the way that I normally do it, is I don't distinguish between action and informational submittals. I tend to believe that the architects really should understand what is required well enough without having to spell that out in each of the technical sections as to how they're going to deal with each of the submittals and what's going to be required to be returned and what does not. I tend to rely more on Division 1, and I will say, for instance, that the manufacturer's certificates in Division 1, I'll state that they are being submitted for the architect's information only, but do not set up separate procedures as to how the architect will deal with those. The ones that do require an architect's action, I tend to spell out what the contractor should expect as a result of making those kinds of submittals, but don't make the distinction by name. Okay, shall we go on and ask the important question, is it important? And I'm not certain that it is. I think that it's almost a procedural question that each firm is going to end up asking themselves, and depending upon how they're operating internally, I think is going to dictate whether or not you want to make that distinction.
Well, let's look at both sides, David. I'm going to take the side that many of them that I think there are some significant liability exposures, and why don't you take the opposite view, which you and I will wind up doing a lot of times.
Gee, it works out naturally, doesn't it?
Yes. My feeling is that a lot of things, for example, test reports, obviously you have to look at the test report to see, is it the right test, are the results correct, but many of these informational submittals are such that we're not in a position to judge whether they are accurate or whether they're even done correctly. Welding certificates, I can look at them and see names, but those are just for information, and I throw them in the file cabinet. But if one stamps those things approved, then I think the firm is taking a certain amount of responsibility for the actual content and the accuracy and completeness of those documents, and so something that might not quite be right, we could get in trouble for. With delegated design, of course, you may...
Oh, you hit my favorite one. I was going to use that for my example.
We may want to get design calculations, and you know, our engineers may want to take a quick look, but they're not going to want to take responsibility for checking every single calculation to make sure that they're right. We'd rather rely on the guy's seal. But there is another viewpoint.
Yes, there is,
and you'll take Kevin's side too, Kevin and Karen.
Okay, yeah, and Kevin had actually written into Lewis and I and expressed a differing opinion that regardless the submittal type as it might be defined, that there's really little difference in the architect's liability and potential exposure. And I've been dealing lately with this issue.
Well, now we do need to explain that Kevin works for a design firm that does water resources kinds of projects, and so he's talking about he may get an informational submittal about some pump capacities or things like that, and then he needs to look at those with as much detail, with as much look at them as closely as he would the things that are more conventionally action submittals. And that's maybe a little bit different from the building construction, but that is certainly a viewpoint that may affect many of our audience.
Right, yeah, because he's dealing with process-related things in water and wastewater treatment facilities. But what I was getting to is the one project or one architectural firm I'm dealing with at the moment is deeply involved in a discussion about delegated design submittals, and they're taking the tack that they really don't even want to look at the calculations. So to avoid having to look at them, they're wanting to require that the contractor include all the design criteria used for the calculations and place all of that design criteria on the shop drawing, so that the architect only need to look at the drawing and simply file the calculations. To me, I think it's a mistake, because there are so many of the calculations anymore that are being done by computer analysis, and regardless of how the information gets transcribed, it could be mistakenly transcribed, and if you're not checking the actual data input for the computer analysis, you could be leaving yourself even more open for a liability. We go on?
Yeah.
All right. Closeout submittals. And we did have one comment come in that said, make sure you talk about commissioning. I believe this came
from Kim.
Yes, it was. But under section format, these are the typical submittals that are named as closeout submittals, and we're all familiar with those, and these are all coming in really as informational submittals, something that you're collecting and eventually going to turn over to the owner for their record and use in operating the building. And then the final group...
Oh, let me go back to that one.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Keem isn't able to join us, hasn't been able to join us yet this afternoon, so let me represent his problem is that he is a commissioning agent, and so he does not write the original specifications, but he's in a position where if the architect does not enforce the requirements for submittals, he can't do his job well. And we all know that sometimes we get in a hurry and we don't enforce make sure that the contractor sends us everything that we've asked for. And so he, as a consultant that works separately for the owner, needs to be able to rely on the activities of both the architect in terms of specifying the right stuff, the right submittals, and the contractor to provide those submittals so that he can do his job. And we might, at this point, ask that next polling question, since that kind of leads us in that direction.
Okay, with a little help from Rob. There we go. It'll also be interesting to see how this question shakes out, because wanting to see how many specifiers are actually involved in reviewing submittals. Because we're setting all the rules.
That's right. We're writing all this awful stuff that to make the contractor, poor honest contractor, jump all kinds of extraordinary hoops just so that they can build the building.
Okay, so there we have it. It looks like we might have 1 or 2 specifiers that are involved.
Yeah, not many.
And the majority is certainly the CA staff at almost 40, almost 50%
half
there. Yeah. And the next greatest falling to the project architect or a project engineer. So here we are, specifiers setting all these rules, and none of us actually have to enforce it. So we're having to make sure that our CA staff, and in this case the project architect, actually understand all these rules.
We had a couple of questions come in and comments. One is Shane says, isn't it important to note that you receive MSDS sheets, material safety data sheets, but not stamp them, so that would be an informational submittal, correct? And I would say yes. I actually had a client when I worked in Cincinnati for a large firm there. We did most of the work for the Cincinnati Zoo, and the client wanted to see all of those sheets because they needed to know what would or possibly affect the animals that were being on display. And so I wrote into my specifications that in Division 1 that those were all to be sent directly to the owner, so they didn't even pass through my office. But there are some other things that are similar to that. One of my bête noirs, things that I really make my teeth grate, is that MasterSpec in a lot of sections wants to have manufacturer's installation instructions as an action submittal. And to me, I think that's a grave liability mistake, because if you read something, and especially if you stamp it, that means that you have read it, you understood it, and you intend to enforce it. And we don't have the time to read all the instructions on how to install every product on the building. If you're out on the site and you think something's going in wrong, and just the other day I saw some storefront that was installed backwards on a building that was several years old, then you can always ask at that point to see the instructions that came in the cardboard box with the stuff and see if they're doing it correctly. Corrine pointed out that the polling question is who monitors, not who reviews, and that is a difference, and that is true. In some cases, we have a document control group here, and one of the things that I want to do is enlarge the group so that we have enough capacity to be able to make the first pass at looking at the submittals as they come in and saying, are these responsive or non-responsive? And if they're incomplete or obviously wrong, the document control person can send it back immediately and save time for everybody. The previous firm that I worked for did that, and it was a great benefit both to the contractor as well as to our own internal staff.
Okay, any other questions we want to go over at the moment, or should we press ahead?
Steve Laundry says, frequently we get submittals without much advance notice, so any selections we make in them will impact the schedule. How do other specifiers get timely submittals? That sounds like we could probably spend almost an entire hour on that. And Steve, I'm sorry, I don't know. David, I'm sure, has a very cogent and quick answer to that.
Well, we typically ask for the submittal schedule be provided by the contractor, and that comes back to enforcing the rules. So if we're specifying the submittal, one way that you can always enforce the rule is through the applications for payment. So if you set specific time frames for things to happen and they don't, you can start withhold payments, or you can stop payment until it is submitted.
We had a question suggesting that we might want to talk quickly about lead submittals. I tend to view those as informational. That's the kind of the policy here at my present firm, although ARCOM puts them in as action submittals. What's your experience on that, David?
My big concern there is I would rather not burden the contractor with multiple submittals of essentially the same thing. I would much rather see the formal product submittal be considered also the lead submittal, because otherwise you're ending up having to look at two sets of documents. And I know that some folks, some of our lead consultants actually ask that they have two entirely separate sets of submittals, one for actually approving the product and separate to approve for lead. I think it's a colossal waste of time.
Okay.
Okay, so shall we press on?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're not going to get to do your demo.
We can always do it next month.
All right. Okay, the last group we had was actually maintenance material submittals. And these are the only things that section format lists: spare parts, extra stock, and tools. Not very much, and it's really just things that get turned over directly to the owner. But somebody has to monitor this and make sure that everything is actually submitted that's requested. Okay.
We do have a couple of more comments. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think they're really good. Kevin Cheney suggests, well, why not just stamp informational submittals as receipt acknowledged in order to avoid liability? And actually, I think the whole point is that an action submittal need not have any stamp at all if it's designated as informational. Now, if you don't list the informational submittals in your specs section, when you return the action submittals by transmittal, you may need to state other items in the original submittal are considered informational, and just to let them know so that everything gets accounted for. I think that's a very good point, Kevin. And then Sandy McClellan says, in loss prevention seminars, professional liability carriers make a strong point that submittal schedules should be specified and enforced. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then Therese asked the question, how can engineers enforce the rules if the architect is not backing them up? And
well, there's a very good question, especially if the architect is the lead and the engineers are relying on the architect to be the enforcer. And if they are not, the engineers are really put in a compromised position. So we have to be working together on that front.
And then there's a comment, how do you approach who provides the submittal schedule? We go back and forth on whether it should be the architect or the contractor. If it's the architect, we run the risk of omitting something from the schedule that's required in the contract documents, and then you open yourself to a debate with the contractor as to whether or not the submittal's really required. This is all from Steve Groth. And this procedure is counter to the CSI principle of saying it once and saying it in the appropriate place. On the other hand, if you require the contractor to provide the schedule, he can easily leave off those that he doesn't want to or intend to provide. That's a very candid comment, Steve. I compliment you on that. This makes it difficult to monitor whether all requested submittals are provided. of course, and then
Well, I'd like to add something there.
specs
Lewis, because-
intact. That's one of the selling points, one of the reasons why some government agencies like specs intact, because it will go through and ferret out all of those submittals. I believe that the ARCOM's new software for processing specifications, I'm pulling a blank right now on the name, is supposed to do that.
That's available
It's
now.
Alteryx.
Yeah, that's available now with their Masterworks. You can generate a report, and I believe you can do the same thing with BSD SpecLink. If anybody, I do it, but I've written a macro specifically to extract all the submittals. There's a nifty little utility out there called File Locator Pro, and anybody could generate the list with this tool, because it'll search text in all the files located in a folder, so you could easily go through and very quickly search for submittals, then search for each of the different types of submittals by name, generate a list that's easily exported, and you would have the quick check. So
Yeah.
there are tools out there to make it easy.
Steve points out that he has not found that Masterwork completely accurate, and that's a problem.
Well, here's the kick, because if you don't use the correct term, or you don't use a term that MasterSpec identifies in their template as being a submittal, it will not find it. So correct, if you're inserting new submittals or using different names, it won't find it.
Okay. And Sandy McClellan reminds us that there are schedules, and there are schedules that, not to confuse time or sequence type schedules with matrix information. Okay, let's see. Well, who benefits? Why do we do this, David? Why do we look at submittals? Why do we require them?
I was
Who
hoping
gets
you'd
the
explain
benefit?
that.
Well, I have a war story. Back in the 80s, the firm I was working for in Cincinnati designed the new basketball arena for the University of Cincinnati. And Cincinnati is very hilly, and there was over a 200-foot long pedestrian bridge that spanned a ravine in between the new arena and the rest of the campus. And I had specified a typical urethane traffic-bearing waterproof coating, and the painting contractor, who for some reason or other was assigned the duty of applying this stuff, instead thought that submittals were a big waste of time, so he went out and bought an interior epoxy paint and applied it to this thing. And the bridge was actually open before the rest of the arena, and the first rain that came along, the students who were using the bridge to get to some dormitories and other parts of the campus are slipping around on this thing like, I mean, it was slippier than deer guts on a doorknob, and it's a wonder nobody was seriously injured. It was that bad. They had to block it off. So we have this big conference, and of course the first thing the subcontractor says is, "Why did you specify this terrible stuff?" I said, "No, I didn't." And well, to cut the story short, it cost him, this was in the late 80s, $20,000 to remove the coating before he could even apply the correct coating. So who benefited? Who would have benefited by a review of the submittal? The contractor, and even the subcontractor. There's a sense in which, from my viewpoint, yes, we are trying to make sure the owner gets what it pays for, but really we're trying to protect the contractor and the subcontractors from themselves. I certainly don't get anything out of it. Do you?
Hey, I'm the specifier, and I'm only just setting the rules.
Oh, that's
so,
right. That's right. You don't look at them. We established that earlier.
Yeah, I rarely get dragged into actually reviewing a submittal unless it turns into a substitution, or unless it turns into something that was just completely unexpected.
Okay.
So
For the time being, then, if we, just as a working position, we take the position that submittals really benefit the contractor more than anybody else, let's pull up our next polling question.
All right. And if we have any contractors on this presentation today, I would love you to type in your comment about that.
Or stick up your hand and give us what for.
All right.
Okay, they're coming in.
They are.
Well, the seldom is a distant third.
Yes, but it's amazing that the top two are almost neck and neck.
Yes, well, frequently and often, the definition between those two is maybe not overly specific.
Well, true. Who made up this question anyhow? Are you?
That was me.
Okay, but we're not official.
So over half the time, like 3/4 of the time, there are problems with getting the contractor to respond adequately. Let's do the next polling question, which is related. David upbraided me for being a little snarky when I proposed this polling question, but we decided it was a good idea anyway. Are the contractors who pressure you to return submittals quickly also careful to prepare the submittals per the specified procedures? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of hearing the phrase team player.
Well, the yes answers would seem to be the real telling tale here. I think we have two that said yes.
So this is overwhelming.
Yes, but
now isn't that interesting?
We have to look at the point of view, though. I would really like to know how many folks that are on the call are actually contractors, subcontractors, or potentially suppliers that might be lumped into that group.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just ask for a show of hands. So we could. I'm serious. So we could gauge who is on the call with us.
Okay. While we're doing that, Steve Groth points out the biggest problem that they have with contractors is that they don't review the submittals they get from their subs or suppliers before they pass them on to us.
And I'd say sometimes, absolutely, that's true. I don't know that that's generally true for all the submittals.
No, and we hope that they, act responsibly. Well, let's go on.
Okay. Okay, so what do you really need to see? Do we need a translation to know what that means?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the questions that we get from some of our clients, especially ones that work in a specific building type, is they really do want to know how can they reduce the quantity of submittals. And we've taken a tack where...
we need to point out that when David refers to clients, he means the architects and engineers who hire him, not the owners.
Yes, not the owners. So the architects are looking for a way to know that they've specified a product, that the contractor intends to provide that specified product, so that the architect need not look at a submittal saying that I'm going to provide the specified product. So we give the contractors an option that if they will certify at the beginning of the project that they intend to provide the specified product for things that do not require special fabrication or custom fabrication to fit. And that's where we draw the line. If it's a commodity product, and the risk of offending anybody, but a toilet room accessory. So it's a manufactured product, it's a unit item, and if we specify a manufacturer and a model number and the contractor says he's going to provide it, that's the last submittal that he needs to make. We don't need to look at a detailed technical drawing of a toilet tissue dispenser just to confirm that it's the correct model number. So that seems to work for our architects that are working in specific building types, oftentimes a repeat kind of a thing where it could be senior housing or it could be healthcare or, but within a specific building type. So,
well, David, when do we need manufacturer certification to supplement product data?
I rarely ask for it. If they're submitting the product data to show compliance with the spec, I think that that's really the extent that I need. Do I need some sort of a test certificate? Maybe if it's a hidden sort of a quality, say a mill certificate for steel, because you may not know the actual composition of the material, and maybe that's important. But beyond that, it's a rare occasion.
Yeah, the one example I can think of is that from a architectural woodworking shop certifying that they have met the AWI standards, since they don't have published product data as such.
Correct. That's a good example. And as for the verification samples, the only time really that I'm asking for that would be if the architect has not made a real specific product or model selection in time to be specified. If we're saying that we want, going back to the toilet tissue dispenser, if we name the product, I certainly don't need a verification sample, as well as I don't need the shop drawing showing the product construction. And sometimes I think the verification samples are really overdone.
The place where I run into those is the finishes that are selected by interior designers. They almost always want to have something, I don't know, even though they are extremely specific that they want this line of carpet and it's this color and this pattern and so forth, they still want to see an actual piece in their hands to say, yep, that's what I asked for.
Okay, and if it were a custom fabricated product, such as a custom woven rug carpet,
which you get into in the entertainment and hospitality projects all the time.
Right, and those kinds of things, yes, I would ask for a verification sample.
Okay.
Let me get going here in the right direction. Okay, Louis, I think you're up with this one. How many do you require? Do you require multiple submittals of electronic copies?
Well, we've actually kind of talked about this question a little bit earlier about manufacturer instructions and so forth. But let's zero in on that small text
that
there.
One?
What's the fine print on this question? So if I do something as a professional, even if I didn't specify it, even if it's not required by my contract, I could still be liable for my actions. Okay, let's go back out.
All right.
And let's look at some of these things. It is possible to specify installer qualifications without having to review proof from the contractor that they are complying with that. We specify that. The problem is that puts the architect, I think, in a questionable position with respect to liability, because if the contractor is using a roofer that's coming from 200 miles away, I certainly don't know them. I have no idea whether they're qualified or whether they're experienced or anything. And for me to look at those qualification statements is extremely questionable from a liability viewpoint, because then if I stamp those as having been approved, as being approved with my action stamp, and then something goes wrong with the installation, the roof starts leaking and everything, guess who's going to get to share in the joy of getting it fixed? Because somebody's going to say, well, you thought that this subcontractor could do a good job. You approved it. So that's the fine print on the unnecessary liability, is to avoid things that we don't need to do. And that kind of relates to the very next polling question. Let's pull that one up, Rob, please.
And while we have the poll question open, I'll say I just sat in on a legal presentation with the Philadelphia CSI chapter, and the attorney that gave the presentation was actually saying that in some cases contracts are actually interpreted by the action of the parties of the contract rather than what
the written word, yes.
Because if you take something on, which is what you were saying here, Louis, that you may assume that responsibility by simply doing the work. Okay.
So looks like the overwhelming majority is actually sending them back.
Right.
I would simply discard them. I certainly would. I wouldn't file them, but and we do have a tiny minority that actually is going to go ahead and review them and that might be an appropriate thing if it's something that maybe we should have asked for in the first place and didn't think of. But any of these, obviously, these are all good answers.
They are good answers.
Yes.
I think returning them has the advantage of putting the contractor on notice that it was something that was not required, not requested, and therefore
a waste of time.
Not reviewed. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's
do we have
go
time?
to the next one, to electronic processing. I think we might actually get to
well, I was curious, Louis. We have several comments here that we haven't addressed,
you want to get caught
and we have about 15 minutes left. Perhaps the electronic is something we do save for next time. What do you think?
Well, let's see. I think most of these I've been trying to keep up, and I think. Well, okay. Let's read some of those.
Okay. Shall we start with Shane David? We've had issues obtaining complete submittals. In an attempt to obtain complete submittals from contractors, we have written into our specs that we will charge a per-hour rate upon the second resubmittal of a submittal. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Have you seen anything similar?
Oh, yes, definitely. I have for years put something in my Division 1 submittal procedures section that says we'll look at one resubmittal. After that, that constitutes additional services to the owner, and the owner may back charge you for doing that because we're going to get paid extra. Now, that is something you do need to, and of course none of us get to negotiate contracts, but that is something that is covered in the AIA contracts. There is a place to indicate how many times you're willing to look at a submittal. Once, twice, for one resubmittal, two resubmittals. It's also a thing that needs to be thought out in advance when you're generating a fee for a project with multiple work packages, where normally we would only have one submittal from a spec section, but we might actually have more than one because of the piecemeal nature of the work that's being done in multiple work packages.
Okay. The next one we had from Margaret Tuning asks, or talks about when we were discussing reducing the number of submittals, saying that that is only good for proprietary specs, but how would you reduce it with a performance spec? And Margaret, you're absolutely right. You need to be, you can't, because you have to be able to review against the specified performance, and you're going to need all the data you can get to help make that review. It relies entirely on naming a product and a manufacturer.
Right. Jim
Okay.
Carlisle has, we have a former contractor at least on board, he says, as a former contractor. Having approved submittals in hand assured us that we would not be exposed to any backlash from the customer. Any change in products or materials would follow with a change order. And you know, this might be a good time to get Liz to come on and talk a little bit about her issues.
That would be a great idea, especially since I promised Liz we would do that.
All right.
So,
Liz, are you there? Stick up your hand and Rob will...
Liz is there. Okay, Liz, your
Hi.
mic is open.
Hello,
Can
Liz.
you hear me?
We
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So regarding submittals and situations where a lack of submittal can cause a problem is when things are added later in the project. And sometimes the architect doesn't realize it's a substitution for something else, or it's a change order and therefore the contractor should have submitted data and all that sort of thing. The architect sometimes doesn't realize that they need to require the contractor to give them a submittal. And like Lewis's story, I've had a couple situations, one where the spec section actually specified a product, but the architect didn't know it was in there. And we had a floor that wasn't level. And the contractor poured more concrete and made the floor even less level because it sagged. And then the contractor wanted to put an underlayment, self-leveling underlayment, that was totally incompatible with a flooring coating that they then proposed. And there were no submittals until I said, well, I need to see a submittal. And nobody noticed the incompatibility with the two products that were being proposed. And it's not that, you know, I'm the only one who could see an incompatibility. It's not that at all. It's that there was no submittal. So nobody looked. And it wasn't in the original contract document. But really, what needs to happen is when there's a substitution or an add or anything like that, the architect needs to insist on a submittal, just like with everything else.
Well said, Liz. Well said.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm glad you were able to join us, and that the mic actually worked even better.
A couple more comments from the floor. Justin Kerfoot, I'm sorry that it's hard to read this thing, but Justin comments that you definitely need verification samples for finishes because there are different dial lots and products can vary in manufacturing, and that's true. You're certainly right. I hadn't thought of that, and that does make a lot of sense if you're, especially on the high-end areas where you're trying to get your paint color to match exactly with the carpet. Karen Woods talks about what about asking for manufacturer approvals of installers. That's something that we may ask for. As I mentioned earlier, you can specify all kinds of qualifications for the installers. What I object to is looking at qualification statements for most things. Now, there are some things where if you're doing a really big curtain wall project, you may want to see some statement of what the qualifications are or some other specialized kind of construction. But do I need to see a list of installations of vinyl asbestos or vinyl composition tile? I'm showing my age there with that Freudian slip. No, I don't need to. Okay.
Hey, and look, we have
Yeah.
a special request here from Charles Adkinson.
Yes, let's do it.
Sometime. So why don't we ask Rob to put up the very last poll question?
Right.
Okay.
And then that'll lead us right into this.
And as soon as you have that finished, Rob, maybe you can transfer the screen over to Lewis so he can do some of his demo. Well, I'm not really surprised at the results here, looking at only a very few that are not using some form of electronic submittal,
Okay.
10%.
Well,
So that, I think that is a general trend. Everybody is heading in that direction.
all right. Okay. Well, Rob, you want to pass over control here?
It's all
There
yours.
we go. Show my screen. And let me. And you'll see a couple of my sons and grandsons. Here we go. Okay, our firm uses a project information management software called Newforma. And, oh, wait a minute. And this is what the submittals processing looks like. I'm sorry, I forgot I have to get my sample submittal coming up here. But the submittals come in and are logged electronically. And the great thing about this program is it is a massive database. So there's a lot of time savings because a lot of things are automatically populated, the information, and you don't have to deal with stuff. But I'm going to show you how the submittal actually comes in an email and then where it goes from there.
So this is taking some of the manual effort out of logging, tracking, responding.
Yes,
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
yes, and it's well integrated with tracking the RFIs and change orders and all the things. Newforma is actually a software that you can work from. It takes charge of your entire project from design to closeout. So I get an email from my document control person, and it says to view the submittal in the project center. So we click on that, and then we go over here.
Now this is
And
also
now it's
recording. This is also recording all the actions, so that it will
Yes.
create a record that you were in there, you opened it, that you did something with it.
Yeah, one of the great things about this is if you send something to the contractor, it will tell you exactly when they download it, and there's no argument. So I click on that this has been forwarded to me for review, and then I can open the this is a shop drawing, sample shop drawing. And this is, we should have picked a smaller one. This is a little large, but here it comes.
So what sorts of files can this system handle? Is it only PDF?
Oh no, actually it can read native AutoCAD files and even native Bentley MicroStation files and all sorts of CAD files, and you can even turn on and turn off layers to a certain extent. Okay, this is a submittal that came in from the contractor, and here is the contractor's assertion that they have reviewed and noted it, and which is good. So that we always want to get that. We'll go to the next page. So if I see something that I want to mark up, I'll get into my markup tools here. I'm going to pick a green pen since the contractor has used red. So I can draw a cloud. I can draw an arrow to point to something. Oops, pointing the wrong way. And then I can write a little note saying like that. And now we're ready. So then I apply the stamp. in case you have more than one stamp. It gives you, you have to set the height to an appropriate size. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that everybody can see it. And you notice that it gives me a place, so I'm going to say this is approved as noted, and today's date is the appropriate date. It's already populated with my name, and I say OK, and then you see this little box floating around, and I'll say, well, I'm going to put it right here in the middle where it won't be missed. And then if we zoom in,
so the markup tools, it looks like, are really not much different than what we would see in a PDF, Adobe PDF
exactly.
or Bluebeam.
Exactly. Oops. Kind of got lost from me there.
Oh, you slid clear over to the side of the sheet. There you go.
We can go back a little bit. Okay, so there's our stamp. It's got the firm name on it. It's got the action taken and the person responsible and the date that it was signed. So from here, then I make this into a PDF and basically send it back to the contractor. And we're at the point now where on all of our architectural projects, we're doing things completely paperless. We don't print them out. We did go through a transition period while we were, for a while, where risk management wanted us to print out record copies, but they've finally got over that hang-up because we have a very sophisticated backup system that backs up things in 3 different physical locations, so it's pretty secure.
Now, when you send these files back out as PDFs, are they all flattened so the text is not manipulated?
Oh, yes. Yes.
By contractors?
Yeah, no, I think that's done automatically by this software, so it's not a separate step.
Okay.
And this has been a tremendous boon. I actually manage our document control group here at Gresham Smith. I have 3 full-time workers, and frankly it would take a 4th person if we were doing everything by paper. So this is saving us huge amounts of money that to do it, as well as saving a few trees and reducing our FedEx costs. And now some of the very, very large submittals, especially structural shop drawing submittals, our guys may print them out to look at them so that they can flip back and forth quickly, because sometimes that is just more convenient to flip back and forth between paper pages, but they do the markups on the electronic copies. So
one last question for me on this, Louis.
Sure.
You're showing us shop drawings, but can you use Newforma? And we had a comment from Karen Wood that there are other software solutions and web solutions. Karen Wood mentioned Submittal Exchange, and I forget, there are a couple of others. But are you using this for more than just shop drawings? For instance, if I'm thinking myself, working with architectural firm, getting comments coming back on a specification, could you treat them essentially the same way?
Oh, absolutely. It's very collaborative. As a matter of fact, I do a lot of the quality assurance reviews for our firm, and I'm starting to use it. One of the things that you can do in that is that in the markup tools, I can zero in on a place. Not only can I mark it up, but I can make that into an action item and assign it to somebody specifically and say, okay, Brian, I want you to, move this wall 6 inches to the left, and I really need it for a meeting that I got to go to on Thursday, and then the machine will actually track that in real time and send out reminders and let me know when it happens, when it's complied with. So there are any number of things that you can use this program for, and we might talk about some of the systems at a future one of our meetings.
Okay.
I see that we're out of time.
We are. We just had a couple last comments, and I'd like to get them in so that we don't lose them. From Edward Dupin, we had We require paper submittals in conjunction with the electronic submittals if the original file is larger than 11 by 17. And we actually have one client of our own, Edward, that requires complete paper copy submission with every electronic submission. And their rationale is that it's the only way that they get the electronic submission to be well organized, because they require both to be identical. Charles Atkinson adds then, we use Newforma and love it. Thank you for taking the time to discuss it. Have there been any studies showing the cost savings using all of the electronic review? Louis, do you know of anything?
No, we've made some rough estimates in terms of looking at our FedEx costs that dropped considerably, and as I say, we'd have to hire another person full-time to be able to handle the workload that 3 people can do today.
Right. Okay, and the last one, Craig Mild, says Newforma has also released their CCA punch list application, works on Android and iPad.
We are waiting to get an update. We're one version behind on Newforma, and we're going to be getting it soon. It's been a little bit delayed because our firm is switching over from Bentley MicroStation to Revit, and so that's been kind of a big cost, but we are going to be doing that in when we're going to move straight to release 9. And some of our people are experimenting with that. You take a tablet computer out. The great thing about Newforma is that it can extract all the room names and numbers out of Revit and pre-populate the list. So you take your tablet computer out, you can take photographs, you can make notes live, and then upload them if you have Wi-Fi back to the office, and it's done.
Yeah.
So we're starting to use that.
Okay, so Louis, we are out of time. We are
out of time. Hey, thanks everyone for all the comments. We really appreciate that. We're glad to have it, and Dave and I have just considered it a wonderful honor that so many folks spend this time with us, and we hope that it's of some use to you. And if you've got ideas for future discussions, future sessions, please, please, please keep the cards and letters coming in, friends and neighbors.
And I got to tell you, I am thrilled with the attendance we had today. I think this is our largest audience ever, and the questions have been fabulous. Thanks very much for participating.